She wasn't there to prove anything. She just needed a hydration rig and a pair of boots for a weekend training event she'd already been cleared to support. Nothing more, nothing less. But when the young officer behind the counter glanced at her jacket, he smirked. And when the lieutenants nearby caught sight of the faded shoulder patch, they started laughing quietly at first, then with the kind of confidence that comes from not knowing any better. No one asked her name. No one asked what that insignia meant. But someone did notice from across the room. A brigadier general. He didn't ask for her ID. He asked her one question. And when he heard her answer, the entire depot went dead silent. Want to know what he saw and why it changed everything? Hit subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Let's begin. The morning air at Fort Dominion felt heavy wet with southern humidity, thick with diesel and pine sap. The kind of summer heat that made a uniform stick to your back before you even started moving. Overhead, a pair of helicopters circled past the tree line, rotors slicing the sky as formation groups jogged across the motor pool in time with barked cadence calls. Inside the supply depot, fluorescent lights hummed over stacks of canvas, cardboard, and duct-taped crates. Soldiers moved with routine urgency gear checks, clipboard sign-offs, coffee in one hand, MREs in the other. Monday morning business as usual. Nobody paid attention when the door creaked open and a woman walked in. Kiona Ridge didn't draw attention. She never had. 54 years old, grey at the edges of her long black braid, wearing a sun-worn jacket that hadn't seen regulation fabric in over a decade. Her movements were clean, quiet, deliberate. She'd been in buildings like this before hundreds of times. But this time, something was different. And it wasn't the paperwork in her hand. It was the patch on her shoulder. Or what was left of it. The heat hit early that morning. Fort Dominion, Virginia, was already steaming by the time the clock ticked past 700. The kind of dense southern air that felt like wet canvas wrapped around your lungs. Every inch of pavement radiated yesterday's sun, and the sky already bleached to a pale blue held the promise of another unforgiving day. The base was built like it expected to last forever. Concrete structures, squared edges, and regulation lines painted with fresh compliance. It had been an artillery staging post back in the 50s, a missile control hub in the 80s, and now served as a joint operations logistics training center for rotational units and civil-military integration. But the bones of the place hadn't changed. It still smelled like JP-8 fuel, rusted bolts, boot polish, and black coffee strong enough to melt a spoon. Morning PT formations jogged past the chain-link fences in synchronized steps, their cadence calls bouncing off aluminum siding like drumbeats in a concrete canyon. NCOs barked instructions with voices hoarse from decades of repetition. Maintenance crews were already elbow-deep in engine bays, the hydraulic hiss of machinery folding into the ever-present hum of military routine. A row of regulation signs lined the main road into the depot compound. Speed limit 10. Salute all officers. No loitering in uniform. Everything had rules. Everything had a place. And anything that didn't fit was noticed fast. Inside the supply depot, the lights buzzed with a tired electric whine. Metal shelving held cases of MREs, hydration bladders, replacement boot soles, coils of 550 cord, and stacks of ACU patterned packs, folded tight like they'd never seen dirt. The air conditioning fought valiantly against the heat, but it was no match for the summer. Sweat still clung beneath undershirts. Kiona Ridge walked in like someone who remembered this place when it still had green walls and paper clipboards. She didn't look lost, just out of step. Her jacket, sun-bleached and threadbare, didn't match the slick polymer patches that modern troops wore. Her boots weren't regulation anymore. Her ID badge wasn't plastic but laminated paper, yellowed at the edges, tucked into a lanyard from a time before everything went digital. And when she walked past the front counter, her presence didn't register the way it should have. Because the rhythm of Fort Dominion didn't make room for ghosts. Not until they forced it to. Kiona Ridge didn't walk like someone who wanted to be seen. She walked like someone who had already been years ago, in places that don't show up on maps. The depot's automatic doors let her in with a sigh, and for a brief second, the light caught the edge of her jacket just right. Olive drab, sun-bleached, and worn at every seam. The fabric looked soft from age but held together by the sheer stubbornness of memory. Its threads no longer bore rank. Only the ghost of a unit patch remained frayed, irregular, and barely clinging to the shoulder where it had once meant something. If you looked closely, you might catch the faint outline of a dark-winged hawk in mid-dive Sable Wind Recon Detachment. A name no one said out loud anymore. A unit that never existed on paper and had no surviving roster. Only a handful of people had ever worn that patch. Even fewer were still alive. Kiona's hair was pulled back into a tight braid, streaked with silver, and bound with the kind of precision that came from years of habit, not vanity. Her face was weathered, not with age so much as experience creases at the eyes, a jaw that had clenched through too many decisions, and a look that measured everything. On the left side of her neck, just beneath the collar, a thin scar curved like a blade's whisper. On her right leg, a slight hitch in her step barely visible unless you knew to look for it. But it was there. A limp earned one night outside Jalrez, when a fast extraction turned slower than planned. She didn't wear medals. She didn't need to. Kiona moved like someone who still scanned exits upon entering a room. Like someone who still counted potential cover points by instinct. Like someone who never quite made it back home but learned how to function anyway. She approached the intake line with a quiet rhythm, paper in hand. It was a simple requisition list, printed off from an email invite sent to a reserve liaison the week prior. 1 pair of size 8 boots. A hydration rig, gasket gloves, duct tape. No tactical gear, no armor, no weaponry. Just the kind of kit you hand out to people who help run logistics in weekend exercises. The young specialist running the desk didn't look up when she handed him the form. His fingers danced across the keyboard, frowning at the terminal like it was giving him attitude. Kiona didn't rush him. She knew how this went. She'd volunteered for this assignment, not because she missed the army, and not because she needed the structure, though in truth, the structure helped. She'd signed up because too much silence was dangerous. Sitting alone in her small apartment outside Roanoke, surrounded by ordered shelves and military memorabilia she never dusted, gave her too much time to think. She didn't want to reminisce, she just needed to move. So when the civilian liaison sent out a quiet call for volunteers with prior field experience pay, but meals provided, Kiona said yes. No one asked where she'd served. No one asked what Sable Wind was. They just handed her the dates and told her to show up at Fort Dominion with boots and a good attitude. Now she was here, wearing a jacket older than the officer running the desk, waiting for a requisition approval that should have taken 30 seconds. Behind her, the low hum of soldier chatter and barcode scanners filled the air. Kiona turned her eyes forward and waited, still and unshaken, as if she'd been doing this for decades. Because she had. They didn't laugh right away. It started like most things in a military supply room, quiet, half-whispered, and confident it wouldn't be challenged. Lieutenant Emmett Rourke leaned against the boot rack, arms folded, sipping something sugary from a plastic bottle. His name tape looked like it had been ironed 10 minutes ago, and the creases on his sleeves hadn't bent once since he walked in. To his left, Lieutenant Hayden Stone stood tall, clean-cut, jaw squared like a recruitment poster. Lieutenant Maria Leclerc hovered just behind them, quiet, sharp-eyed, saying nothing but not stopping anything either. When Kiona passed, Rourke raised an eyebrow. "Guess Halloween came early," he muttered, just loud enough for the others to hear and for Kiona 2 aisles away to pretend she hadn't. Stone chuckled. "That jacket's seen more washing machines than field ops." Leclerc smirked. "Looks like something her granddad left in a box marked Vietnam." They didn't need to be loud. They just needed to sound sure of themselves. "Bet she tells people she used to jump out of planes," Rourke added. "Secret missions, classified units. If I told you, I'd have to kill you kind of stuff." "Classic fake vet material," Stone nodded. "Old jacket, long stare, scar she won't talk about. All the ingredients. She probably shows up to VFW halls telling war stories," Leclerc said, finally speaking. "Ones no one can verify. The three of them laughed, soft but certain. The kind of laughter that doesn't echo off walls but presses into a person's spine. Kiona didn't flinch. She'd heard it before. Different names, different tones, same dismissive air. To them, she was a relic, a mystery, a fraud, maybe. Someone looking for attention in a place where people worked hard to earn theirs. None of them stopped to ask. None of them thought to, because in a base like Fort Dominion, confidence outranked history. And three fresh lieutenants, with crisp uniforms and empty field folders, had decided Kiona Ridge was playing soldier in a uniform that didn't belong to her. They didn't know the name stitched into the inner seam of that jacket. They didn't know how many miles it had walked under fire. They didn't know what the patch used to look like before time, sun, and silence wore it thin. But someone else in the building did. And he was already watching. The specialist behind the counter looked barely old enough to vote. His name tape read Holland, and the way his fingers hovered over the keyboard suggested he was more afraid of making a mistake than missing a regulation. He scanned Kiona's requisition slip, squinted at the screen, tapped a few keys, then frowned like the system had personally insulted him. "Ma'am," he said, voice unsure, "it's asking for a current unit code. The form's not going through without one." Kiona said nothing at first. Then, with calm, deliberate motion, she pulled a tri-folded packet from the inside pocket of her jacket. Official orders, signed by a battalion logistics officer, full of stamps, notations, and that familiar whiff of printer toner and chain of command. She placed it on the counter without comment. Holland picked it up, read it once, flipped the pages like something might be hidden between the lines, then tried again. Tap. Tap. Still nothing. "System's rejecting it," he said, voice dropping to a murmur. "Says it needs supervisory override. Sergeant's in briefing. I can maybe call him, but—" He didn't finish. That's when Lieutenant Rourke decided to be helpful. He sauntered over with the relaxed confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "Let me see that," he said, plucking the paperwork from the counter like it belonged to him. He held it to the light, turning it this way and that, as if looking for flaws in the paper. Or maybe just trying to be seen doing something authoritative. "Looks pretty good," he said, smirking. "We get these all the time, you know. Old waivers, expired letters, folks trying to slide by on technicalities. Lot of people out there who want to look like they were somebody." Kiona stood still. Her eyes didn't narrow. Her mouth didn't move. "Nothing personal," Rourke added, like that made it better. "But I've seen a dozen of these in the last month alone. You'd be surprised how many folks out there collect patches and tell stories that never happened." The young specialist shifted behind the counter, caught between regulation and rank, looking to Kiona like he wished someone else would decide for him. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or insist on her credentials. She simply reached for the papers, folded them neatly, tucked them back inside her jacket, and turned without a word. At the far end of the depot, past a gurgling vending machine, and beneath a rusted wall clock, a metal bench sat against the cinder-block wall. Cold, unforgiving. The kind of seat made more for waiting than for comfort. Kiona sat down with the ease of someone who had waited before, for transport that never came, for orders that never got issued, for confirmation that didn't arrive until the shooting already had. She rested her clipboard across her lap, hands steady. She didn't plead, she didn't protest. She just waited like a professional accustomed to delays, like someone trained to be patient in rooms colder than this one, with more at stake than a pair of boots and a hydration rig. The depot's air conditioner kicked on with a low mechanical groan, stirring a brief draft that drifted across the room and tugged lightly at the hem of Kiona's jacket. She shifted slightly on the metal bench, adjusting the strap of her shoulder bag to ease the dull ache radiating from her right leg. The old injury flared when the air got too still, like the ghosts beneath the skin didn't like being ignored. As she reached to reposition the clipboard on her lap, the fabric of her jacket pulled taut. Just enough. The shoulder seam lifted. A shaft of pale morning light filtering in through the high windows caught the worn material at the perfect angle. For a moment, the past revealed itself. There it was, what was left of it. A patch that no longer had color. No borders. No legible text. Just frayed thread, faint outlines, and the ghost image of a winged hawk in descent, talons outstretched, forever frozen mid-strike. No one outside a specific sliver of American military history would have known what it meant. It didn't show up in any uniform regulation manual. Didn't have a Wikipedia page. Didn't exist on any official unit list. But some people remembered anyway. Chief Noel Boone had been walking across the back of the depot with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a mug of burnt coffee in his free hand. He was older than most, barrel-chested and slow-moving, with the kind of carved-in-place steadiness that comes from 30 years of service and a healthy disrespect for anything newer than Windows XP. He wasn't looking for anything unusual, just moving from one task to the next. Then he saw it. That patch, or rather what used to be a patch. His steps faltered mid-stride. The mug in his hand stopped mid-air. His breath caught, but only for a beat. It was as if some part of him had recognized an old frequency, one he'd forgotten how to tune Tobut, still remembered how it felt in his bones. He didn't say a word, didn't call anyone over, didn't make a scene. Instead, with a subtle turn, Chief Boone pivoted away from the aisle, made a quiet beeline for the side office, and closed the door behind him without a sound. No one else noticed. Not yet. But something had shifted. Kiona didn't even realize what had happened. She'd grown used to the way light moved through space, how time and wear made things invisible. The patch hadn't meant to be seen. Not anymore. It was simply part of her, like the scar on her neck, or the limp in her step, or the silence she carried like armor. But someone had seen it, and someone remembered. And sometimes, that was all it took to change everything. By mid-morning, the depot had found its rhythm. Again boxes moved, clipboards exchanged hands. Someone in the back cursed about a missing shipment of zip ties but near the boot rack. A different kind of noise was building. The kind of noise that came with knowing you wouldn't be challenged. Lieutenant Rourke leaned on a supply crate, like it was his personal podium, telling a story that had little substance and even less humility. "I had this guy in ROTC," he began, voice pitched just enough to carry. "Claimed his dad was deep ops in the 80s. Used to flash some patch no one recognized, tell stories about operations in countries we're not even allowed to name." He chuckled and took a sip of his drink. Turns out, the guy was motor pool. His most dangerous mission was changing tires outside of Fort Hood. Stone grinned, tapping a finger against the steel toe of his boot. "You can spot them a mile off. They all do the same thing, old jacket, distant stare, maybe a limp if they're really committed to the bit." "Exactly," Rourke nodded. "They lean into the mystery. Never say what they did. Just enough to get people to fill in the blanks." "Bet she thinks she saved the world," Stone added, glancing toward the bench at the far wall. "Maybe in some top-secret dream nobody can verify." Lieutenant Leclerc didn't say much, but she didn't leave either. Her silence was the kind that added weight to the words being said. Rourke gestured loosely in Kiona's direction. "She's probably got a whole closet of that stuff. Patches that don't exist, ribbons from stores that sell them by the handful. Stolen Valor's got a whole starter pack now." He was getting bolder now, energized by his own voice and the subtle encouragement of nods and chuckles, the kind of laughing that happens in safe places among people who all look the same and assume they know better. Kiona didn't move, still seated, still silent. Her hands rested on the clipboard in her lap. The light from the high windows had shifted. The patch on her shoulder was no longer visible. But that didn't matter anymore, because someone else had entered the room, and he hadn't said a word. The first sound was softer tray setting down harder than it should have. 4 cups of black coffee clinked against one another with the kind of weight that made people look up without knowing why. The man holding the tray didn't speak. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Combat-worn OCPs. Sleeves rolled to show tattoos that weren't for show. Pathfinder, Airborne, Ranger scroll inked into skin that had seen dust, sweat, and blood. A name tape stitched in black over tan. McGraw. The rank beneath it. said Brigadier General. And when he stepped forward, coffee in one hand, presents in the other, the room changed. The laughter died. Not faded, not drifted, stopped. Rourke froze mid-sentence. Stone lowered his drink. Leclerc's eyes dropped. Not one of them said a word. General Elijah McGraw didn't glare, didn't shout. He simply picked up the fifth coffee black, no lied, and walked, slowly, purposefully, across the depot floor. He never looked at the lieutenants. He never acknowledged their presence. Because he was already headed for someone else. Kiona hadn't moved, but something in her posture shifted. A quiet alignment, a straightening of the spine, the kind of stillness that spoke of instinct and memory. McGraw didn't stop until he was within arm's reach. He stood there, coffee in hand, the silence around him absolute. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't a reprimand. It was a question. Directed not at the officers, but at the woman who hadn't said a word since she entered. He stopped beside her like it wasn't the first time they'd shared space in silence. Kiona didn't look up. She didn't have to. The air around him had changed, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from posture but from presence, like old trees that never need to sway to be noticed. McGraw held the fifth cup of coffee in his hand, black and steaming. Not offered as a gesture, not ceremonial, just set gently beside her on the bench. Then, after a moment, he spoke, quietly, intentionally. "That patch on your shoulder," he said. Not accusing, not curious, just weighted with memory. Kiona didn't respond right away, but she straightened slightly, eyes fixed forward, her body instinctively aligning to the sound of someone who had once earned authority the hard way. "Sable wind?" he asked again, voice lowered. She nodded, just once. "Yeah." McGraw exhaled through his nose, not a sigh, something deeper, something stored. "I was at Crossfire Moon," he said. "Lower corridor. Convoy pinned between ridgelines. We had 2 medevacs grounded and no air cover. The ravine was crawling, no way out." His voice grew steadier as the memory found its footing. "You cut through Sector 3, blew the eastern wall. That gave us an opening. I watched it happen, saw your unit move, ghosts in daylight. I'd never seen anything like it." Kiona's jaw shifted slightly, as if weighing a response she hadn't planned on giving. Then, "We were never supposed to remember. But I do." He nodded, just once. No formality, no thank you. Only acknowledgement. From one survivor to another. 2 people bound not by paperwork or ceremony, but by the fact they were still breathing when others weren't. The depot behind them kept humming distant voices, movement, routine, but none of it touched the space between them. It was a meeting that shouldn't have happened. Between 2 names that don't appear in the same line of any record. And yet here they were. One question, one answer. And all the noise in the world couldn't touch what passed between them in that moment. The silence in the depot had thickened, no longer awkward, no longer performative. It was the kind of silence that arrives when a room realizes it was wrong. General Elijah McGraw turned slightly, eyes scanning past Kiona toward the supply counter. His voice, when it came, was calm and precise, exactly the kind of tone that made orders stick. "Chief Boone," he called, not loudly, but with the weight of someone who didn't need to repeat himself. The side door opened almost immediately. Boone stepped out, composed, eyes alert. He hadn't missed a word. McGraw didn't break eye contact. "Sergeant First Class Kiona Ridge, Sable Wind Unit, Field Designation Echo 9. I am ordering that she receive her full requisition, immediately. No delays, no verification needed." Boone didn't ask questions, he just nodded. "Understood, sir." Behind them, the depot was still. Forklifts had paused mid-movement. Pens were set down. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum quieter. McGraw stepped forward, his voice carrying across the room like a low chord in a quiet chapel. "I served with the 27th Pathfinder Battalion, Crossfire Moon. If it weren't for her unit, I wouldn't be standing here." He turned toward the supply counter now, eyes resting on Specialist Holland, who looked like he'd swallowed his tongue. This woman ran interference through a ravine laced with pressure mines and hillside fire. They had no CAS, no recon, and no medevac support. Her team cleared that corridor by hand, while we dragged wounded and held a perimeter. She didn't do it for glory. She did it because no one else could. The young lieutenants were standing now back straight, arms stiff at their sides like they had suddenly remembered what uniforms were supposed to mean. McGraw nodded once, as if that would suffice. The debts owed to units like hers don't show up on ledgers. But we carry them. Quietly. Every one of us who made it out because someone else went in. He looked back toward Boone. Get her what she came for. That's not a request. Boone was already moving, barking quiet orders into the back room. A sergeant emerged with a sealed pack. Boots, hydration system, gloves fresh stock, regulation quality, the kind that came with names written in ink and not pencil. Kiona stood slowly, still without a word. Not victorious, not vindicated, just steady. As if this was the way it was always supposed to go, like honor was just balance finally returning. Holland stepped aside without being told. The requisition was processed in seconds. No screens locked this time. No manual override required. McGraw remained nearby, but said nothing more. It didn't need repeating. Because in every corner of that depot, from the warrant officers who had once scoffed to the newest recruit behind the scanner, something unspoken had taken root. A recalibration. A correction. A memory that wouldn't be found in any official archive, but would be remembered nonetheless. The gear had been issued. The screen had been cleared. The room had started moving again, if only slightly. Kiona adjusted the strap of her hydration rig, the weight familiar now. Her boots tucked under one arm. She turned to leave, quiet as she'd entered, when she heard soft steps approach. Lieutenant Emmett Rourke. He wasn't striding this time. He wasn't leaning or smirking. He stopped 2 paces in front of her, hands clasped awkwardly behind his back, like a cadet on his first inspection. "Ma'am," he said quietly, voice stripped of its earlier swagger. "I want to apologize for earlier." Kiona looked at him, expression unreadable. "I didn't know," Rourke continued, eyes dropping briefly to the floor. "About your unit. About who you were. I just—" She raised one hand slightly. Not to stop him. Just to still the air between them. "You never asked," she said. Just 3 words. But they landed like a sentence. His mouth opened, then closed. There was no argument. There wasn't even defense. Just the slow realization of how much he'd assumed and how little he'd known. Kiona studied him not with judgment, but with the measured look of someone who'd had to learn her own lessons the hard way. "We all come up through something," she said after a moment. "Some of us walk farther to get here. Doesn't mean we walk louder." Rourke nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't offer a smile, didn't let him off the hook with a joke, but there was no venom in her tone either, just truth, carried in the cadence of someone who'd earned every scar. He stepped aside, and she passed without another word. Behind her, the depot was still again. But this time, it was a different kind of quiet. Not fear, not shame. Respect unspoken, but deeply felt. And somewhere inside Rourke's spine, something finally stood up straight. Outside, the Virginia sun had risen to full strength. The asphalt shimmered. Her truck sat in the far lot, heat rising in soft waves off the hood. Kiona walked steady. Not fast, not slow, just with the rhythm of someone used to carrying her own weight. Boots, rig, clipboard, silence. Then, footsteps matched hers. She didn't look right away, but she knew. General Elijah McGraw had fallen into step beside her, quiet and unhurried, like they were back on some nameless trail, half a world away. They walked together until they reached the tailgate of her truck. No urgency, no small talk. The kind of stillness only 2 veterans could share without explanation. He finally spoke, low and direct. "We've got a joint training rotation starting next month. Tactical interdiction, urban close quarter. The team needs a lead who's seen real thresholds, not textbook scenarios. She looked at him, not surprised, not eager, just present. You think I'd still know how to teach that? She asked. I think, he replied. You never stop knowing. She nodded once. Might be good for them to learn from someone who's actually been there. He returned the nod. We can't print that kind of knowledge in manuals. She opened the truck door, set her gear inside, then turned back. I'll think about it. He offered one more look, this time softer, familiar. Not general, he said, just McGraw. She gave him the kind of nod that meant everything without saying anything. Then she climbed in, cranked the engine, and pulled away, no fanfare, no applause, just dust rising in her wake. And behind her, Fort Dominion stood changed. Not by orders, but by memory. Some people carry entire histories on their shoulders and never ask to be seen. Kiona Ridge didn't come for praise. She came to serve, quietly, like she always had. But the world doesn't always recognize quiet strength. We live in a time where loud voices often drown out the ones that truly matter. Yet stories like hers remind us, dignity doesn't shout, it endures. The lesson is simple and timeless. Never judge by what you think you see. That faded jacket, that scar, that slow, steady walk. They might hold more history, sacrifice, and honor than any parade or speech could capture. We all know someone like Kiona, maybe a neighbor, a friend, maybe it's you. So today, let's choose to ask before assuming, listen before speaking, and always carry our own stories with the kind of grace she showed. If this story moved you, we invite you to subscribe for more true tales of quiet heroism, forgotten valor, and the dignity that never fades. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and take good care of one another.